Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We have a beautiful spring day that I really admire you for being here. We can all be outdoors as well. Well, I'm delighted to welcome Stephanie Page. She's Executive Director of Sacred Thread Center in Newton, and her topic today is nurturing spiritual well-being in our lives and organization. So take it away, Stephanie.
Okay, thank you, Dora. So welcome to everyone. I am pleased to be here to talk about spirituality as a foundation for our professional lives and our work life and our organizations. It's been integral to so much of my own experience in the nonprofit sector. But before we begin with slides, I want to invite you just to take a deep breath, if you need a couple of deep breaths. And I just invite you to get comfortable, to take care of yourself during this time. If you need to turn off your camera and stretch or lay down and listen to this, I really encourage you to do what you need to for yourself. This is part of the series on self-care. And before we get started with slides and the official presentation, I want to read you excerpts from a poem called Remember by Joy Harjo. Remember the sky you were born under. Know each of the stars' stories. Remember the moon. Know who she is. Remember the sun's birth at dawn. That is the strongest point of time. Remember sundown in the giving away tonight. Remember the plants, trees, animal life who all have their tribes, their families, their histories too. Talk to them, listen to them. They are alive poems. Remember the wind, remember her voice. She knows the origin of this universe. Remember, you are all people, and all people are you. Remember, you are this universe, and this universe is you. Remember, you are this universe, and this universe is you. So we'll be talking today about spirituality and how we are part of something greater than ourselves, whether we are consider it the universe or something else. So now we can advance to the slides. So when Dora and I started talking about this webinar today, it was as part of a self-care series that the nonprofit Now to Greater Boston is doing. And I want to acknowledge it is a difficult time, and it has been in our country. We just have a new war now. But many of you, in addition to the normal stresses we have sort of in our lives, many of you in the nonprofit sector are serving communities that are facing many challenges right now. So I hope this does provide ways for you to consider self-care, but not just self-care individually, what you can do for yourself, but what you can do with other people, whether it's your organization or whether it's just people within your organization, how we really need to help care for each other. And the overview for today on this slide is, well, I'll introduce you to Sacred Threads. We'll talk at the beginning about what is spirituality and how does it intersect with religion. And then we'll talk about some individual spiritual practices and applying those practices to communities and organizations, and talk about a couple of examples, and then consider what it means for you. I hope that at the end, there's something you can take away, sort of new insights and new steps you might want to take for yourself or with other people inside or outside of your workplace. And if there are things that we don't cover that you want to discuss, I just want to invite you to feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to talk with you. I know there were several questions that were posed during the registration, and we'll probably tap into some of them, but probably some we will not. So do feel free to reach out at the end of this if you'd like to talk. So Sacred Threads. So our mission is to strengthen spiritual connections and a sense of meaning across all life seasons through inclusive programs and a culture of compassion and support. We are a women's organization. We are women centered, but we are not exclusive to men. And in our programs, many men do join us. We offer workshops, speakers, gatherings, one-on-one support to help people to weave spirituality into their lives and connect what is sacred to them. And I'll mention a few of the programs that we have had throughout the webinar, and at the end, I'll mention some that we have coming up too and invite you all to participate in. So to start talking about spirituality, there are a lot of different definitions of spirituality. And I don't have the one definition for you, but for the context for today, for the nonprofit space, I want us to invite us to consider Lisa Miller's definition for us today, her definition of spirituality. She's a clinical psychologist at Columbia. She wrote the book, The Spiritual Child, and a recent book, I believe, is called The Awakened Brain. And she says that everyone is welcome to define spirituality as they want to know it and to feel it exactly as they want. So while we'll start and sort of ground ourselves in this definition for today, I just really want to be clear that you are welcome to define spirituality in the way that feels best to you and suits you. So her definition here is spirituality is an innate, scientifically backed human capacity, not just a belief, but a capacity to experience a personal connection to a higher power, nature, the universe, or a sense of oneness. So not just a belief, but an experience that connects us to something greater than ourselves. For many people, spirituality is connected to their religion, but in the context today, we're talking about it more broadly. And in a minute, in just a minute, there'll be a 3.5 minute video where Lisa Miller talks about spirituality, and she does mention that intersection between religion and spirituality. The benefits, there are many benefits to a spiritual life. And Lisa Miller will talk about them a bit in this short video, but there's a great quote here that engaged spiritual life enhances grit, optimism, and resilience while providing insulation against addiction, trauma, and depression. So in our country now, or in our lives, where there is so much isolation, we need more than ever. There's a real rationale to really consider building our spiritual lives and our spiritual communities with each other. And there are many paths to the spiritual life that you will hear about. So the next slide is the video for 3.5 minutes. Could you start it at, I can't hear it, but can you start it at, I believe it's 2.5 minutes? Can people hear it? There's no sound. Thank you for your patience. Well, we try to make this video work for us.
All right, Stephanie, can you indicate where we should start it again?
I believe it's at 2.5 minutes.
2.5? Okay. Yeah.
Personal spiritual life can be formed many ways. Some people say it is through prayer, meditation. Others say in nature. Nature is my cathedral. That's where I realize. And in fact, we have a great deal of science that says nature actually entrains the brain. Walking through nature is very much what prayer might do. It awakens our natural spiritual awareness. People realize their spiritual nature through many paths, one of which is religion. For about 2/3 of people, they say, I am spiritual and I am religious. And then for about 1/3 of people, they say, I am a profoundly spiritual person, but I am not religious. Both are good, and both tap the same neural correlates. There's much Strom and Dross. I am Catholic, I am Jewish, I am Muslim. Well, actually, we're all using the same spiritual neural correlates. So I often hear people say, am I a spiritual person, or how do you define spirituality? And everyone is welcome to define it and know it and feel it exactly as they want. And it is also the case that just as we are born with 2 eyes, 2 ears, and a nose, we are born spiritual beings with a natural seat, a neuro seat of transcendent awareness. We are born, every one of us, with an innate capacity for spiritual awareness. There's one spiritual brain, and we all have it. When we realize our nature, when we build, if you will, and strengthen the spiritual core of who we really are, then our lives unfold in an entirely different way. Life is healthier. Life is far more full of resilience. Life looks different. It's far more of an adventure, an expedition. And when we boil down and look right at the data, where hundreds of peer review articles say beyond a shadow of a doubt, there's nothing as profoundly protective against the diseases of despair, the epidemic of our time, as a strong spiritual core. Over the past 25 years, as a scientist and as a clinical psychologist, it's become crystal clear to me that suffering is an invitation for a deepening of spiritual life. But we have to say yes to it. Spirituality is not a life hack. Spirituality is a deep reorientation in our lives through which we see into the truer, more foundational nature of reality. There are always two realities, and they both matter. We are a point and we are a wave. We are magnificently distinct with GPS coordinates all over the globe and exquisitely diverse, zipped up bio bodysuits. And at the very same time, we are part of one human heart, one field of life, one oneness, a unit of reality, one field of consciousness, loving, sacred consciousness. And we are built to be able to toggle between these two realities. Every one of us is built to be able to perceive that we are exquisitely unique and we are part of one great sea of life.
Thank you. If you have a chance to watch that video, there's music on it and you can look it up. So how do we get to, go to the next slide.
What if I told you that we have?
So we'll try again. So the next slide, I'll just start talking about the next slide while Laura brings it up. So how do we get from talking about the universe, this great sea of life that we're a part of, to talking about our lives in nonprofits today? And I want to share that there are many spiritual paths, as Dr. Miller said. And my path, I just want to share a bit about my path. My path really started as a child growing up on a farm. And so these two pictures here, one is a calf, and the calf is actually a newborn. She's sucking my fingers. I don't know, maybe 10 or so there in that photo. And then underneath it is actually an aerial photo of the farm that I grew up on. It was a dairy farm. And it's beautiful, but I will say that my childhood had some real suffering and pain in it, and my family has been quite broken, even to this day, my nuclear family I grew up in. But where my spiritual core formed was as a child growing up in this setting, where I was connected to the land and the mountains and the animals on the farm. And that's really where my spiritual path started. And it wasn't until later on in my early adult life that I would really say that my spiritual life really connected with a faith life. And I have found faith a way to give language to my experience and my beliefs, and a way to go deeper in it, and a way to be in community with others. And so faith continues to be a part of my spiritual path, and quite connected to my spirituality. But nonprofits have been too. So since my early adult life too, I've been working in nonprofits, starting with community organizing and social justice work. And I imagine for many people that there's a lot of meaning in what you do in nonprofit work, that it's more than just a job. And that's the way it's been for me. And I've met many people who are motivated for many different reasons, very deep, deep, meaningful reasons, to do the work that they do. This picture here, the two pictures to the right, are pictures from Abby's house, where I was executive director from 2014 to 2023. So the top picture is with me with the founders, and then a longtime executive director, and the bottom picture is of staff. And Abby's house mission is to provide shelter, housing, and support services to women experiencing homelessness, have histories of trauma, and really have limited resources. And this became a place that while not religious, it was deeply spiritual, a deeply spiritual secular organization. And so I'll be sharing a few examples from Abby's house, and how spiritual work can be done in a nonprofit organization. So if you can go to the next slide. But first, talking about spiritual practices, what connects you individually to what is most sacred in your life, to what is spiritual to you? There's a list here of some spiritual practices that come from the Spiritual Practice Toolkit, which comes from an online source named Spirituality and Practice. And they actually have 260 spiritual practices listed. And there are things that you can do every day. As they say it, it's how you wake up and you come alive to the spiritual reality around you. And they're practices. So they take practice and a commitment, and I think real intentionality to use these practices as something that do connect us to the universe, or what is greater than ourselves, whatever we may call that. I want to point out two things on here. One is like grief and loss are on here, which Dr. Miller talks about. Often grief and loss and pain can connect us to something deeper. And also creativity is on here. So one person who registered asked about creativity, and indeed, creativity can be a spiritual practice. It's not just what we make, but creativity is really who we are. It connects us to our essential nature as human beings and of the universe itself. And when we make things, it can be an opportunity to tap into something greater than ourselves. So, what practices, as you look at this, what practices do you incorporate into your everyday life that strengthen your spiritual core and build resilience? That might be on this list, or maybe not on this list. And I invite you to put them in the chat so we can hear from each other. What spiritual practices do you use in your life? So if you can put them in chat, and let's give it a minute to hear what people have to share. Crochet, rest, friendship, food, gardening, walking, chanting, eating, blessings, gratitude, meditation, prayer, art. Walking's been mentioned several times. Birding. I've always wanted to do birding. Gratitude among waking and throughout the day. More art. Loss, caregiving, family, friendship, tarot, ofrendas, animals, gardening, prayer. So there are many examples of spiritual direction. So many examples there of things that you do already. A musar practice daily. So things that you do, this beautiful list. And there may be some here that you want to consider for yourself. As I said, birding has always interested me. I especially love this time of year and walking and listening to the birds again. So if we go to the next slide. So one thing to consider about spiritual practices is that they just don't have to be done alone. And they don't have to be done just outside of our workplace. That spiritual practices can be done inside our workplace, and they can be done with others in community, both inside and outside our workplace. So this quadrant comes from Margaret Benefield's book called Soul at Work. And actually, Sacred Threads will be sponsoring a workshop with Margaret and her colleague, Deborah Jackson, at the end of this month that we invite you to participate in. I'll provide more information at the end. But Margaret, in this quadrant, kind of lays out really clearly like a way to think about spiritual practices to do alone or to do together. I recently heard this definition of community as any time two or more people gather. So if we think about our workplace, yes, there's an institution there, there's the organization, but we're in community with people. And so there's many things sometimes we do that are with others that's not an official sort of, something our organization does, but there's ways that we may connect with others in a spiritual way. And as I said, these can be done together or inside spiritual practice together, inside the organization or outside or by ourselves. And the bottom right quadrant is where we think about spiritual practices inside the workplace that we do together in that bottom right quadrant. And the top right quadrant is individual practices that we do inside the workplace. So we can do things individually or we can do things together. So I want to share a couple of examples from Abby's house. So you can move to the next slide. So when I started at Abby's house, it was 2014, and there was a really phenomenal mission statement and a vision statement. But what I noticed is that the organization had some really special values that were not articulated, and yet were really the foundation for the organization in so many different ways. So one of the first things that I did in the organization was we had a retreat with our board and our staff, and we articulated what were the values of Abby's house. And this is where the fertile ground is and was then, and I think continues to be, for spiritual practices together in the organization. And so you can see them here. They're hospitality, diversity and equity. It started as diversity and equity, and this one value we did expand later on. But diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, anti-racism, and belonging, compassion and respect, women's self-determination, ability to make decisions for themselves, and then collective effort. That was really, Abby's house is really a community of people working together on its mission. And so thinking about spirituality in the workplace, one consideration is to go to your values. what are the values of the organization? And is there ripe ground there for some more spirituality in your organization? And so I want to focus on compassion here. If you can advance to the next slide. So it was compassion, the definition or the value was described at Abby's as each person deserves to be treated with dignity and care. We develop caring, supportive, non-judgmental relationships, and we listen to and give each other support. That was how we defined our value of compassion at Abby's house. I want to say that actually Sacred Threads this fall had a series on compassion, actually self-compassion, compassion for the earth, and compassion for others. And so I've expanded this here to consider compassion for yourself as well as for others. Sometimes we think about compassion as something we give. We need to give it to ourselves as well. So practices, examples of some practices. How do we practice compassion for ourselves and others in our workplaces, in our nonprofit organizations, or in the communities that we're part of? And I put a few examples here, and I welcome you to add examples in the chat of how you practice compassion, either individually or together with others in the workplace. And so, or if you want to practice them inside a community, or maybe you do outside your workplace too. So any of those really you can add. And I put two here. The first two are individual ones, and I put them because not necessarily something that I always did for myself at work, but I do more and more, which is this self-hug. And so maybe many of you know about this, and there's a lot of variations on this. There's the butterfly self-hug, but the self-hug is just simply a tool to kind of ground yourself and cross your arms and put your hands on your shoulders. The butterfly hug is actually tapping yourself. But it can be a way in a stressful moment to step aside and give yourself a little extra compassion when you need it. And then there's an affirmation that I like, which is go with it, which is say, may I be kind to myself. Because we know that we all can be, as human beings, pretty critical of ourselves and judgmental towards ourselves and expect a lot of ourselves. And so it's important that we be kind to ourselves. So I like to start there when talking about compassion. And these are things you can do during the day, right? You can do inside work. Just say, you go through something is difficult, and just give yourself a little extra compassion, give yourself a little bit of kindness. And then the other examples I've listed here are examples that we did together at Abby's house collectively. So we had a multi-year initiative on integrating trauma-informed care that aligned with our values. We worked with Institute for Health and Recovery in the Boston area, which is an amazing organization. And trauma-informed care really helped us to build connection and trust in our relationships with the people we serve, but also with each other. It wasn't just about the people we served. How do we build trust and connection with the people we work with volunteers, with board members, with our donors? They're all part of the community. We saw ourselves as a community, and our values, and including our trauma-informed care work, we strove to integrate anyway across the entire organization. And there were really some great specific techniques there and actions that we took. But we also, a couple of things that were really special was that we had a memory quilt. And the story goes that a quilt was donated to the organization years ago, and the founder, it had gotten thrown away because it wasn't in very great shape. It was a little tattered. And the story goes that the founder actually pulled it out of the dumpster, had it fixed up, cleaned up, fixed, and started it as a memorial quilt. And it hangs in the organization to this day. And when people pass away, their names are written on the quilt. We even had a pet therapy dog whose name, Phoebe, is on that quilt. And when the quilt filled up, we started a second quilt. And it's a way to honor, right? Honor the lives of everyone sort of in that community. And then we would have remembrance ceremonies too, where we would take time to recognize people we had lost, and value and sort of honor their lives and what their lives meant. And a couple other things here we did together was we had community luncheons two days a week, where really we were just sitting with each other. Again, volunteers, staff, the women we served were all invited. We would sit together and we would have just everyday conversations with each other and be connected to each other. And then in that space, one of the things before I left left that role in that organization is that we did a mural together that hangs in the space where people dine. And if you go to the next slide, you're going to see a picture of the mural. So it says, "You are loved." We gathered together, and with an artist who outlined it. And we all got a brush and we painted a piece of it. So we did this collectively. And it hangs to remind people of their worth, right? And of their dignity, and that they're valued, and that they're loved. So these are a couple of things, examples that really come out of the organization and who the organization is and its values that I did together that really are very spiritual, and that they honor each other's worth and the dignity and the understanding that our lives are to be valued. And so I invite you, some people have written some things, I invite you to add to the chat how you practice compassion. If there's things that you want to share today with each other, deep listening, in direct service. My body would get very tense. I found jumping up and down for 30 to 60 seconds helps me feel less physically anxious. It's wonderful. And then do breath work. Wonderful. Personal check-ins before team meetings. Wonderful. Are there other things that you want to share? How you practice compassion? Summer Fridays off. Yes, days off for staff, for their self or community renewal. So please feel free to continue to add to the chat, because there might be something that really speaks to another person here, where the setting they're in, it may be something that's really right that they can use. A collective poetry sharing, yeah. Okay. So we can go to the next slide. So rest and Sabbath. So Tricia Hersey is, she's known as, I think she's known as the Bishop of Napping. Her ministry is called the Nap Ministry. And she writes this phenomenal book called Rest is Resistance. And really it spoke to me, having spent many years in the nonprofit sector, about grind culture. And she talks about how our value is really judged by relentless productivity and normalizes exhaustion and burnout. And she calls us to see our bodies as a miracle and a place of reverence, where existing in exhaustion is not normal and not acceptable. So have reverence for ourselves, our bodies, and know that exhaustion is not normal or acceptable. And so to really rest and care for ourselves. And so it's really just like I said, I think a really phenomenal book, which I know in my experience in nonprofits that I've been very much caught up in this grind culture and very much contributed to the grind culture until I didn't any longer. And Kathleen Hirsch recently did a program for Sacred Threads, and she talked about her talk was Holy Rest for Hurried Times. And she talked about practice pausing and stepping back throughout our day. And one of her quotes was, Sabbath is a sanctuary in time. So if you can get moments during your day where you can step back and step out of your day and get that moment for something sacred for yourself, some sacred time for yourself to pause and connect to whatever is whatever you consider sort of sacred. Her work on the Sabbath, she mentioned, is based in the Jewish tradition of Sabbath. So rest and Sabbath time. So just time to rest and honor our bodies and to find those moments that feel holy and sacred throughout our day are one way to practice spirituality in our days, inside our work or outside of our work. And so some examples here. And so somebody asked me actually, or in the registration, how to make time for yourself when there's so much to do. And I can so relate to that, right? When we're so caught up, there's so much to do. It takes real practice, and it helps when we're together talking about how do we make sure that we are taking the time to rest and care for ourselves and not caught up in that grind culture. And there are some things we can do individually, and the things we can do together. I put a couple here. Again, they're not the ones for, but they're just a couple of examples. And so morning meditation is one way to start your day. It's one way I've started my day. It's really nice. Insight Timer is free, and there's meditations on there. And you can revisit that. There's a lot of like the Calm app or Insight Timer. There's a lot of opportunities to do, right, 1 minute meditation to make it easy for people. And then I really found meditative walks during my day. I really discovered at the end of my time at Abby's house, which were just a gift for me when I would learn to step out of the office and take a walk and just slow myself down. It's listening to those birds, or sing, or things, maybe it's snow, maybe things are starting to bud, but really connecting to what is around me at the time. And really, it's exercise, but it's more than exercise. It was really about a connection outside of the workplace, a connection to nature and to myself and to the things that are sacred and holy to me. We did do, I want to mention at Abby's house, we did I loved staff meetings. Partly I loved bringing people together. And we would do guided meditations at the start of staff meetings, or do some breath work together, or do some stretching together. And it just gave people a chance to come and just settle into that space and sort of be in that space. We also, at the end of my time, we did retreats, but my favorite retreat was sort of at my end of my time there. You can tell I learned a lot of lessons that I was really using at the end of my 9 years at Abby's house. But we did a retreat at Tower Hill Botanical Garden for the staff, and it was really special to be there in that setting with each other, to be able to walk around. And we were there I believe it was in June. And so if I could go back, I'd do more retreats, or encourage people to really consider retreats that give you some space to connect with each other, connect with the place that you're in, and find what is sort of holy to people or sacred to people through the space. And then sabbaticals, I just really want to encourage nonprofit organizations to consider sabbaticals. I took a sabbatical for myself that I really, the organization did not sponsor. But through that, I really learned that it's really helpful to take some time away and for organizations to support that. And if you go to my LinkedIn page, there's an article on there and that was published in the Worcester Business Journal, and there's some resources about sabbaticals for nonprofits. So again, these are just some examples to kind of just give you a taste, sort of from my experience. And so I'd invite you again to put in the chat, how do you practice rest and Sabbath time? How do you practice rest and Sabbath time? So I see some things in here, checking in with people who live alone or going through difficult times. Insight timer is great. Somebody uses Insight timer every morning. Sabbath equals 25 hours without work, shopping, laundry, obligations, email or news. Renewal and refreshment is vital to function effectively. We are human beings, but we're right, we're often human doings, but we are human beings. Enter in the early morning or in between, either in the early morning or in between Zooms. I sit on my back steps in my very urban neighborhood with a cup of tea and crumble leftover bread or stale nuts for the squirrels and the birds who enjoy a snack. Gratitude journaling. Okay. So I invite you to continue to put things in here. And I will say that in Margaret Benefield's work, that being spiritually grounded ourselves helps bring spirituality and spiritual practices into our organizations and ground our organizations in them. And so those things that you do for yourself, whether they're individually inside or outside your organization, are good grounding for bringing more spirituality sort of into your organization where it's right for your organization. So some other things here about practicing rest and Sabbath, walking alone or with friends, contemplative walking, poetry reading, music, singing between meetings and activities, prayer through the day, calling family members on the way home from work, stepping away from screens, closing eyes for a few moments. Wonderful. They're all wonderful. If you can advance to the next slide. So I wanted to give us a few minutes to reflect on and talk about, so where is fertile ground for you for new individual spiritual practices inside or outside of your organization or your workplace? How can your organization or community honor your spiritual lives together? So I've given you sort of a very high level sort of look sort of into spirituality and spiritual practices individually and in our workplaces and communities. But really, where is fertile ground for you, both in your life and the communities you're part of and your workplace? Margaret Benefield has a quote here. She says, listen for soul. Soul has a way of cropping up naturally within organizations. You can notice and name those places where soul crops up and thus complement your other efforts. Where is there growth and potential for growth in your organization where you can cultivate spirituality in your organization as a way of caring for yourself and caring for others? I'm happy, Laura, if we want to come off for just a minute, if we want to come off the slides. There is one final slide, but if we want to come off, if anybody wants to share anything that has come up for them, we might have time for maybe 2 or 3 sort of quick shares or questions. And I love it. You can keep things coming in the chat. You can keep reading in the chat. Does anybody want to share anything that has come up?
Stephanie, I'll share my appreciation for you hosting this.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you for being here. And as Dora said, you know, there were a high number of people who registered for today. So you're not alone if you're feeling like you want to sort of grow sort of that spiritual life for yourself or in your workplace or your communities. That I think there is a hunger that many people have.
Stephanie, I think you're right. I lead a food justice access organization. We farm and do all sorts of stuff, and it's just nonstop. And the urgency is nonstop, and only getting worse under the current administration. I invited one of my younger staff and colleague members to come so she can hold me accountable. I find it easier to do something for those who work with me than for myself, but I'm using that as an excuse to then take a moment for myself. So if I make everyone else breathe or give them a treat, then I take joy in that and give myself permission to do the same. It's sad that I can't just do it for myself, but whatever tricks work for you.
Well, I think that's just, I appreciate you naming that because you're not alone. And I think it's hard for many of us. And it's just beautiful what you said, Elizabeth. Really beautiful. Thank you for sharing. So maybe one more share.
Don't be shy. Here's your chance. We have a few more minutes with Stephanie. If you're comfortable or not, turn on your camera and just share. Gail.
I just wanted to say thank you for bringing this into the conversation, especially with respect to nonprofits. I mean, there's so many topics that our culture doesn't talk about as normal, like menopause, grief. I mean, just all sorts of things, and spirituality is one of them. And it's part of everyone's life, whether they feel it or not, or someone they're close to, and it's necessary. So thank you for doing this work. And I invite others to join me in making a donation. I didn't get paid.
Thank you.
Just,
Thank you. I will say, Stephanie and I spoke, and I'd say the board of Nonprofit Net, we're all volunteers. We, in planning this series, started a year ago. And I reached out to Stephanie during the summer. We think each day, we think we know what's going to happen tomorrow. And here we are a year later. I mean, even a week ago or 2 weeks ago, we had no idea where we'd be in. And, it's really, we're living, I sometimes think, are we really living in a time that we don't know? It's easy to look back after something has happened and time has passed. But when you're living in the moment, every day, it's hard for us as human beings to take the time and to give ourselves grace, to give ourselves space. And especially those that work in nonprofits, there's a sort of, whether we like it or not, there's an implicit societal expectations that people give who work in the nonprofit space. need to sacrifice as if that is something, but it's a community responsibility that we all have. And it's something that any way that we can support the work that everyone is doing to really help make the world a better place is so vital. So thank you.
Thank you, Dora. So in closing, there's one slide left. I just want to talk about a couple of opportunities that are coming up through Sacred Threads, and then I want to read a poem to close that's about rest from Kathleen Hirsch. So this QR code will take you to our website. And as I mentioned before, I think Sacred Threads does have opportunities to to explore sort of spirituality in your lives. And we are hosting at the end of this month, March 31st, from 11:30 to 1:30, an online workshop with Margaret Benefiel and Deborah Jackson, who I mentioned. Margaret was quoted, referenced several times on these slides, and they've offered to do this workshop. And we wanted to offer it to you, knowing that there is an interest and a need for nonprofits. So we invite you all and anybody who's registered for today for this webinar. There's a $25 discount off your registration for you and anyone from your organization. So if somebody couldn't have been here today and you want them to come, really, you can't, Margaret, and I can't say enough about Margaret and Deborah and what they have to offer. They're going to focus on how you bring one's whole self to work. And Margaret is the founder of Executive Soul. She directs the Soul of Leadership program. Deborah is her colleague in that program. And Deborah, interestingly, was just the dean of the business school at WPI, just finished her tenure there. So if you're interested, I have no doubt that they will be phenomenal. I have much to offer to you to go further in this discussion. And then we also have a poet, Maggie Smith, coming on Wednesday, May 13th. And she'll be reading poetry and talking about women's lives throughout many seasons. And that will be in May, and that information is on our website as well. And if you're interested in collaborating, you think there's some way to collaborate with Sacred Threads, I invite you to reach out to me. Or as I said before, if you have questions that didn't get answered, or you want to explore some topics, feel free to reach out to me. And then you can follow us to learn about offerings that will be coming up in the future. You can follow us on Facebook, we're on Instagram, LinkedIn, and on our website, you can sign up for our monthly e-news as well, and to get notified about programs that we have. So I invite you all into Sacred Threads and to any of the programs that we offer, and invite you to connect with us. So in closing, I just want to read this poem. It comes from a book of poetry called Mending Prayer Rugs by Kathleen Hirsch, who was our presenter in January on Holy Rest for Hurried Times. So it's called Compline. Each day there is one thing to be done, and one only. Remember that you love. Remember that time, this day, like the ones that came before, and the ones to come after, exist only in time. And that we break a sacred law when we allow the clutter to suffocate the self that exceeds time. This morning, it was the tile man bringing news of discontinued stock. Yesterday, the busted basement door. There are as many ways to keep you from the holy as there are grappling hooks in the ivy. There is only one way. Close your eyes. Reach for nothing until you can do as the voice of your dreams on the membrane of day commands you to do. Make all things sacred. Make all things sacred. Thank you.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Just to let you know of our webinar next month, for those of you who are volunteering, running, managing nonprofits, next month's webinar is the calm before the campaign, planning for a productive fall with Angel Brunel. It'll be on Tuesday, April 14th. Thank you all for coming today, and thank you very much, Stephanie, for a really wonderful workshop for us all. Thank you.
Yeah.